Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson of World Alternative Media here, and of course we're joined by author and economic analyst here at WAM, John Sneisen, and we are joined once again by Rob Kirby of Kirby Analytics, and there's a lot to talk about today, so we'll get right to it. Mr. Kirby, first of all, thanks for joining us. You write about a vast array of subjects plaguing the financial world, and I wanted to start with something more simple this time. What do you believe to be the number one most prevalent, important story of 2017 going forward?
The existence of dark money and and what it and really the upshot and what it all really means to this world.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot that we're going to go into today regarding that, but I guess we'll start. John, you
Yeah,
wanted to ask him
yeah.
something.
Actually, talking about dark money, I'll go straight into it with you. Can you go into the vast manipulation of gold and silver by the banks and the Exchange Stabilization Fund, and give us a bit of an update on the paper gold market versus the physical gold market?
Well, paper gold versus physical gold. Um, what we are told is price discovery, namely the price of gold that we're given by the powers that be for consumption on a day-to-day basis, is set on markets like the COMEX in New York or the LBMA, the London Bullion Market Exchange in London, England, where a blizzard of paper contracts or futures contracts are traded between market participants, which ultimately produce what we call in London, it's called the London Fix, both AM and PM, where the price of gold or the amount of fiat dollars that'll be exchanged between buyer and miner, call it ultimately, the people that extract the physical metal from the Earth's crust, the prices that they're going to receive for their work is determined by the exchange of these paper contracts, and really have no bearing on what the real underlying value is of the physical commodity that's coming out of the Earth's crust. And to be a little bit more specific, oftentimes on these exchanges where the paper is traded, you will see, for instance, every time an ounce, or let's just say for every physical ounce of gold that would be in the inventory of an exchange like COMEX, you will see more than, say, 300 to 500 ounces being sold in paper form. So um, the the amount of selling that occurs versus the amount of physical metal there is in the real world, the two just don't compute. And further to this, to deal with the manipulation issue, we've seen over the past 15 or 20 years in particular a steady diet of what seems to be, to put this into basketball parlance, and when I say basketball parlance, think in terms of the Harlem Globetrotters playing the Washington Generals, who are the Duke basketball team that we always see play the Harlem Globetrotters, and the Washington Generals play do a traveling circuit around the world with the Globetrotters, and they've never beaten them once. It's a very well rehearsed routine where this make believe fictional team, the Washington Generals, look like they're a basketball team, but they go through antics and they allow the Globetrotters to beat them with all the theater and drama of a comedy show, and this happens over and over and again. Well, in the gold market, we see a similar situation that goes on time and time again, where a group of people seem to get long paper contracts, and there comes a point where the powers that be overwhelm the people that are long the paper contracts, and they absolutely drive the price of the paper contracts into the ground, forcing a liquidation of the people that have purchased the long positions in the precious metal. And this goes on through what's called the rolls and the futures in the precious metals arena. This goes on time and time and time again, and it becomes almost in a dark, cathartic kind of way. It becomes comical because these people that get fleeced by the, let's just say, the bullion banks, the J.P. Morgans, the Goldman Sachs, the Morgan Stanleys of the world, who are the big commodities trading houses, they seem to be able to fleece the other side of the trade every time. And what I'm saying here, there never has occurred in the past 15 or 20 years where the people who are short metal have been forced to cover and buy. It's only ever a situation where the people who are long or speculating that the price is going to go higher are forced to sell. And this is not the way free markets trade. In free commodity markets, there will be instances and situations over time where people who are short are forced to sell, and prices spike dramatically higher. In precious metals, this never occurs, and this is what indicates that we're basically looking at a rig job. I would contend, that being said, I would contend that a large part of the people doing the buying are very likely the same people who are doing the shorting, because what they're doing, in my view, is they're drawing money out of the slush fund, call it the exchange stabilization fund, just to make matters neat and tidy. They build up a huge amount of long position, and then they shower that long position and they self-liquidate to bring about this predetermined outcome of a wash and rinse cycle. And this goes on time after time after time. And then, of course, there are stooges or trolls in the marketplace who will say, well, who would ever be in the business to lose money? Well, if you're the creators of fiat money, and fiat money is your stock and trade, and you can create additional fiat money units for zero cost, keeping people believing, A, that we have real free markets, and believing in the value of fiat money, throwing a few, let's just call it would come out of their advertising budget to make people believe in the underlying value of fiat money. Well, so sure. That's sort of in a nutshell.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, it's important to mention, I mean, what ensures wealth better than gold and silver historically? And when they pull that away from the public's ability to actually ensure their wealth, then obviously they have another greater control complex that they can capitalize on. And obviously this is going to be what I kind of call a beach ball effect, where you force that beach ball underwater as much as you can. It gathers pressure, and once that banking system goes down, well, I see gold and silver skyrocketing. But of course, we don't have a whole lot of time to go into all these, so I wanted to get into a few subjects with you, Mr. Kirby. So I wanted to go into another big form of wealth insurance and investment as well, and that is the entire cryptocurrency market cap has gone from $17 billion in January to beyond $330 billion in December. What does that say about the fiat system, bond, and derivatives markets?
Well, I view the move to the cryptocurrencies as an anti-dollar trade, and the long and short of it is what is occurring in the cryptocurrency world, in my view, is exactly what should be happening in the precious metals arena, but it's not permitted. So there are dollars seeking alternatives to the fiat monetary system. The gold and silver as a free market has, from a price perspective, has been blocked from rising, and therefore people are seeking alternatives that are allowed to go up or be seen to be going up. And to me, this explains virtually all of the movement into into crypto money. But the interesting thing is, certainly from my perspective and my experience, because I am involved in procurement of metal, I would suggest that the very smart money, let's just say Asian money, European money, old money, is indeed buying physical metal, and they're buying all of it they can get their hands on, despite what the paper markets are telling us with the suppressed prices.
Yeah, we see a lot of people within the top banks, the top echelon, buying a lot of gold, buying a lot of silver, and buying a lot of Bitcoin. I mean, there's a move into that at the same time as the establishment says, don't buy gold, don't buy silver, don't buy Bitcoin. We saw recently, I think it was Jamie Dimon, who was saying Bitcoin is a terrible idea, stay out of Bitcoin. Yeah. Meanwhile, he is putting a ton of his own money into Bitcoin.
Yeah, JP Morgan in Europe, meanwhile, was buying in Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we see a lot of the same people who are saying don't get into these markets, buying into these markets because they want to be the...
Yeah, it's trying to be a market maker, you know.
Yeah, but...
talking down the prices.
On the subject of Bitcoin, Mr. Kirby, what do you say to those who regurgitate the Bitcoin is a bubble claim as a reason to not enter the market?
Well, for Bitcoin being a bubble, to me, is I dismiss that as being ridiculous. The real bubble in the world is the fiat U.S. dollar and the U.S. government debt market. And sort of related to that topic, I think the biggest thing that people, I mean, I started this interview by saying that I think the biggest problem in the world or confronting humanity is dark money. Yeah. You see, my big thing is, and it's with basis, because I'm just following along from the yeoman's work of Dr. Mark Skidmore of Michigan State University and Catherine Austin Fitts, who have shown using government data that the amount of money in existence is factually dramatically bigger than anyone counts. And I mean, you know, we have documented proof in government data that there's $21 trillion that ostensibly that the Department of Defense from the years 1998 through 2015 that they can't account for where it went. Well, I'll tell you where an awful lot of it has gone. It's gone into dark pools where it's not counted by the people who keep data on monetary aggregates and the like, and therefore the amount of money that is actually in existence absolutely and utterly dwarfs the amount of money that we're told is in existence. So when you start talking about bubbles, if you're talking about, and this plays back into the notion of inflation, because I've maintained for 15 years anyway that I've been writing that this monetary or fiat monetary experiment that we're currently embroiled in will end in a hyperinflation. And I've had a lot of very smart people say to me over the years, well, Rob, you know, you're going to have to explain to me where the money's going to come from to cause the hyperinflation, because, you know, in their learned views, they kept trying to make the argument to me that the only way this would end would be in a deflation, and a monetary collapse would end in a deflation. And you see, with the acknowledgement of Skidmore, Dr. Skidmore's work, and the work of Catherine Austin Fitts, we know that the money's been created, and we know that it's been hidden from view. So the money that's going to cause the hyperinflation is already in existence, and the dramatic rise in the cryptocurrencies, in my view, might just be the thin edge of the wedge of a hyperinflation, which is about to beset us all. Because it's my contention, in my view, that foreigners, big money and big decision makers around the world are well aware that the Americans, or the let's just call it the Anglo-American financial complex, or the criminals that actually have control of it, have created more money than we could ever imagine in our wildest dreams. And these people realize, in my view, that this money could very, very quickly go the route of the Weimar hyperinflationary experience or the Zimbabwe hyperinflationary experience, and these U.S. dollar fiat currency units that they've created, and I mean tens of trillions more than is acknowledged to exist. These currency units could turn to tapioca very quickly. And, once the people who are in control of those dollars or those fiat units, once they get it into their head that that's exactly what's likely to happen to them, they're going to start reaching for anything and everything in the world that they perceive to have any value or to be spendable anywhere in the world. So, from that standpoint, the global community seems to have adopted or embraced these cryptocurrencies. So they're reaching for those now because they seem to be getting rewarded for doing so, because the price is appreciated dramatically. And the reason the price is increased dramatically in the cryptocurrencies is there, to date anyway, there's no way to sell a cryptocurrency you do not own, because there are no futures markets to date for cryptocurrencies. And the proposed futures markets, which are supposed to come later this month.
The Chicago Board of Trade and then New York Stock Exchange.
Yeah. Yes, but none of these plans actually allow people to settle in the cryptocurrency itself,
of course not.
Because there's a very limited supply of these cryptocurrencies that will ever exist.
It's the same old scheme.
So instead, what they're proposing is that they're going to have these futures trade, and they're going to settle them in cash. Well, let me tell you some of the shortcomings that I see in my mind. To begin with, these exchanges like the CME or the NASDAQ or give me any of your XYZ exchanges around the world. They're open 5 days a week, and they're open during business hours. I don't know of any exchange around the world that trades on the weekend. And the real market for Bitcoin trades 24/7. It doesn't take weekends or Christmas off. And, and we see the price of Bitcoin move sometimes in 24 hours can move $1,300, $1,400, $2,000, $1,300, $1,400, $1,500, or $2,000 bucks. Mm-hmm. Well, in a cash settled futures contract, like, I can just see every financial institution on the planet bleeding from the ears after a few weeks of trading. Yeah. I mean, one day last week, we saw the price of Bitcoin go up $1,500, then down $3,000, and then up $150.
Well, yeah, I think it was yesterday, the 3rd of December, we saw it go up from about 10,500 to 11,800, back down to 10,500 again within a couple hours.
Yeah, it's such a young market, and the market cap is so low compared to when you look at, for example, I was looking at the S&P 500, about 20 trillion.
Mm-hmm, absolutely, and just looking forward on it, people who say it's a bubble have to understand that how small of a percent of people who are actually in Bitcoin versus how many could be in Bitcoin. I think it's extraordinarily undervalued at the current price that it's at, and I think that that's a great reason for people who've been saying since $20, oh, it's too late to get in. Maybe they should take a second look at it.
Yeah, the link of trust is broken, as Rob has been talking about here, with the US dollar as world reserve currency.
Well, and just moving on from that, because as you're talking about dark money, bear with me for a second. This is a little long-winded, but I want to get the full context in here. Moving from that to centrally planned cashless systems, countries around the world, mainly China, India, and Sweden, are moving to a completely cashless system, as Treasury Secretary Mnuchin at the same time has been threatening to cut China off the US dollar, which would likely be a perfect storm for them as countless other countries swap out of the US dollar. The IMF is talking about moving their headquarters to Beijing and is working hard to develop a centrally planned cashless system with the SDR. I know last time we spoke with you, you thought it couldn't happen under Trump, but with Trump praising the Federal Reserve and the same old deep state banking cronies at the helm, do you think this is a serious concern, or do you stick by your previous statement to us? And if so, why?
Well, let's first just be a little clearer. When you talk about a China moving towards a cashless system, that is not my impression of what China is about, or what they're in fact doing at all. What China is highly favorable to is substantive money. And what I do see China doing, and the other Asian participants in the global economy, they're they're going to be moving towards asset-backed money. And asset-backed money versus cashless, a cashless financial system are two, at least in my view, conceptually, two completely different things. So what China is all about, in a very from a very high level, they're about sustainable practices. They don't want to do a flash in the pan trade with any country or with humanity. They want to develop means where we have sustainable trade. Like the trading relationships China is seeking to develop with the rest of the world are sustainable trading relationships, not a devour and conquer strategy. They want trade that's going to endure, and they realize the shortcoming of money that's backed by nothing, because that's the fiat system we currently have. And while you have a deep state operatives like Jim Rickards, who claims that the SDR is going to be the next money or the alternative to our current system, is pretty much pushing a do-over for the hacks and the criminals who have developed the system we currently have, where you have money backed by nothing. And an SDR amounts to basically money backed by nothing again. It's giving the current regime, who have smashed the Titanic into an iceberg and have it listing deeply, saying, you know what, let's just let them try again. Except this time we'll call it an SDR. Now, China, that's a dog that won't hunt in China. China wants asset-backed money. They want money that is, let's just say, backed by real stuff. And that's where they're moving, in my view. And any talk to the contrary is rubbish coming from deep state trolls.
Well, I would say that there's no doubt that there's a power shift when it comes to gold. China has been gathering a lot of gold, a lot more than they've been admitting to. But with that said, I mean, they've also been talking a lot in the financial sector about pushing something, even if it's backed. It would be a digital currency going through the banking system, which would mean that, if your money's in the bank, it's not yours, it's a bank's. But if your money's always going through the banks via digital transactions, legal tender laws, then you never really own your money. And we've seen the same thing in Sweden, where they've only 1% of transactions are actually done in cash. Whether the elitists in the system are gathering sound valuable currency or money is another thing from what the public will be forced to use in the future, because whenever the IMF gets involved in something, I have to question what is their long-term strategy.
Well, I don't think the IMF is, to be honest, I don't think the IMF is an institution that's really going to be long for this world, because I don't believe that in my view, the IMF and the World Bank are both constructs that were invented, in the Bretton Woods era to perpetuate the use of the dollar as the world's reserve currency. And this is a model that's failing. And I mean, the IMF and the World Bank are both I'm going to call them crutches for the dollar system. And this is the system that's failing. And this is why the BRICS nations have created their own sort of I don't want to say equivalents, but institutions to mimic what the World Bank and the IMF do, but in their own world. So I mean, I can see if I'm working at the IMF, I'm looking for a new job. So because I don't think that's an institution that's going to be around a lot longer.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, when there's the level of desperation we currently see in the monetary systems around the world, they're obviously worried for a good reason. And I mean, recently we spoke with Jim Rogers about it, and he says, yeah, we're definitely going into a cashless system. We spoke with Ron Paul. He says, I don't think we are. They want to push us in that direction, but the dollar will crash first. And I mean, there's a lot of kind of back and forth confusion about whether we're actually going to get there.
It's just desperacy. Like I read the Curse for Cash by Kenneth Rogoff, and it's just to get more taxes into the government. That's the number one push of this cashless society, and negative interest rates. That's the two major points that he made in his book.
Well, when we saw a 5.5% drop in interest rates going from 2008 to I think 2012, there's going to be a lot larger of a drop this time around if they even are able to manage it. But I mean, it would be into negative territory, much like where Sweden is right now, where they have a cashless system.
Yeah, well, what Rob's saying is, it's completely broken the trust with the U.S. dollar system, and they're desperately trying to, move like the rats are scattering away from the sinking ship and trying to get into other assets, move away from the dollar. We see that with so many swaps around the world, even between gold and other currencies and currencies in between each other without US dollars.
Yeah, you won't hear me argue that point. There's no doubt that there is a lot of desperation as the ship sinks. But John, you had a question for Rob here.
Yeah, Rob, do you see the central banks having an exit strategy on shrinking their balance sheets, or will we see the balance sheets explode again as their policies are not working?
Well, in the real world, my view is that there are no natural buyers for the garbage that the Federal Reserve has on its balance sheet. And the only place they can offload any of it to are these dark pools of money like the Exchange Stabilization Fund. I found it amazing over the past 3, 4, 5 years that America's biggest traditional financiers have been lightening up on their U.S. government debt holdings, and interest rates are, even as much as the Fed has ballyhooed that they're going to raise rates, the 10-year U.S. government bond is virtually unchanged over the last 3 or 4 years. We've had times when it's moved up 20 basis points, 30 basis points, and to be honest with you, I haven't even looked where it is today, but I'll guess it's probably somewhere around a 2.30 yield. And because that's where it's been sort of stuck for the longest time, even though the Fed has been clamoring that rates are going higher, and they just never seem to go higher. And I mean, because there's no buyers of U.S. government debt, and that's, I mean, let's just say the fact that there are no natural buyers of U.S. government debt should portend for dramatically higher interest rates, but they never seem to go higher. So then you have to start asking yourself, if America's biggest financiers traditionally are selling U.S. government debt, who's buying it? Who has the money to buy it? Nobody. And what, in my view, has been happening as this debt is being bought with dark dollars, a good deal of it coming out of the Exchange Stabilization Fund, in my view. It's being bought with dark money, and those bonds are just literally disappearing into the same place where the dark money came from to purchase them. Yeah. So people are being reimbursed for their government debt as they sell it, and this is why we're seeing, in a world where rates are going higher, in a world where there's no inflation. Why is it globally we're seeing equity markets at record highs, and they continue to go higher? Cryptocurrencies are racing up off the blocks, and there's no discernible backup in interest rates, and real estate around the world is at record highs. Like, this is not what you'd naturally expect to see in a world where credit's becoming tighter. And money's becoming tight. Like, it's the opposite. What we're seeing is inflation. What we're seeing, and yet the government tells us that, in the U.S. and in the Western world, we're told that inflation is well under 2%. But I mean, I find it hilarious in Canada that our government tells us inflation's under 2%, but the cost of housing in the last 5 years has doubled. Food prices are up. The cost of an education continues to go up in double digits. Property tax increases are going up in double digits. Cost to insure a car is going up in double digits, and yet we're told there's no inflation. So anyway, that's the way they want to tell it, and they also want to tell us that that the U.S. government isn't buying bonds or there's no QE program in place. And from the Federal Reserve's perspective, they may not be doing QE, but the U.S. Treasury through the Exchange Stabilization Fund, I would say, sure as heck is.
It's funny that you mention it's funny that you mention that education costs are going up. I mean, at this point in time, who wants to pay more for a lesser education? It seems like the more expensive it gets, the worse the so-called education gets. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Well, and also looking at the ECB is doing exactly the same. The issued debt is way more. Way less than actually what the ECB is buying. So much more debt than actually is getting issued by these countries. So it's definitely the dark pools out there, sucking in. It's like a dark what do you call it, a black hole of economics here, where the Exchange Stabilization Fund and other funds are out there hiding and sucking in all this capital, hiding it off the books.
Yeah, it gets worse and worse all the time, which is why it's good to always speak with Mr. Kirby about these issues, because he puts certain insight into this that we don't really get from many people these days. And I'm always surprised that you're not on television more often there. But of course, they don't want this kind of information getting on television, which is why we do what we do here and spread that information as far as we can. But bottom line, Mr. Kirby, what's your advice to people entering 2018 when it comes to protecting their wealth and steering clear of the monetary and market manipulators?
I remain a staunch advocate of owning and holding physical precious metal. Yeah. It should be the backbone of anybody's, let's just say, financial well-being. I believe in prepping to a point. I think everybody should have some storable food, and I think everybody should be very mindful of their surroundings. I think people should get to know their neighborhoods, their neighbors, try to associate and deal with like-minded individuals. These are all, at least in my view, these are all elements of a long-term viability plan. And probably more than anything, and I don't care who it is you might want to call your God or who you worship or what you worship. But you know what? Get your spiritual house in order. I think we're due for some very, very rocky times, and I think what's likely to come is going to test the spirituality of a whole lot of people in the very near future.
I certainly agree. I guess you could say what we usually say here when it comes to preparing ourselves is, food, water, shelter, self-defense, so you're not gathering things for the toughest guy on the block. Then, of course, diversification of gold, silver, maybe a bit of Bitcoin, financial responsibility, and total self-sustainability.
Yeah, and on the educational side, just recently, and we'll talk to you about this later, Rob, it's the Red Pill University as well, where like-minded people get together. Exactly what Rob wants everybody to do here. So there's a lot of great solutions out there. We just got to get together and study. Please study hyperinflationary scenarios around the world, and you'll understand why Rob is saying what he is saying.
Well, all fiat currencies eventually revert to their intrinsic value of zero. They always have, they always will. And we're going back to 1024 AD in China. It's almost 1,000 years, and people don't learn, which is exactly why this boom of the internet is so important as we continue to get this information out, while the narrative is still, censored and manipulated on television, no matter what station you watch. It's just so important to get real sound information instead of faulty information that plays against each other from both sides of the political spectrum. So with that said, I thank you for joining us today, and I want our viewers to make sure to check out KirbyAnalytics.com for constantly updated, need-to-know information on the markets and the monetary system. Very important stuff. Let's get this information out there, and we have to be the change we wish to see in this scenario. And as Mr. Kirby said, spirituality, folks, we don't talk about that enough. Very important. We got to get our mindset in place so that we are able to fight this thing long term. So thanks again, Mr. Kirby, for joining us, and we hope to see you again.
Pleasure being with you guys.
Like what you see here at WAM? Don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon, we can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so overwhelmingly demonetized and censored by YouTube as the Anti-Defamation League comes in and flags all of our content as hate speech. You can also find me at Josh Sigurdson at steemit.com. That's steemit.com, the future of social media, where you get paid in the upvote of your post via Steem, the cryptocurrency. You can also find our Bitcoin address in the description and the comments below, as well as on the screen for you to scan if you please. And don't forget to come on down to Anarchapulco in Acapulco, Mexico in February, one of the best events of the year, and you can save money on your tickets by typing in promo code WAM. That's WAM. We'll leave the link below for you, and until next time, don't forget to subscribe. This is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.